Let's talk the color. One more thing, like, subscribe, and share. Come on, let's talk the color. Woo!
Hey everybody, good evening. It's Cutler here on the Let's Talk to Cutler broadcast, the Let's Talk to Cutler YouTube channel, the Let's Talk to Cutler virtual book club, the Let's Talk to Cutler 1800 seconds of sharing information and engaging in dialogue. And I'm so thankful for another opportunity to spend this time with you. So wherever you've allowed me to come and share this time with you, thank you so much, whether it's your living room, your bedroom, your guest room, your front porch, or if you're out walking, wherever it may be. I'm so thankful for that. I'm thankful for these moments when we get a chance to share and reflect on how we can see if we've learned anything about yesterday, in terms of making sure that we've shown up today better than we did yesterday, in terms of making sure that we are intentional about showing up better tomorrow than we have shown up today. Just making sure that we are doing our best to make sure that we are presenting our best selves, even in the worst of situations. That's what life has become for me. It's become a number of opportunities to make sure that my character shows up, that my integrity remains true, and that I show up when life challenges me, when life throws me curveballs, when life throws me lemons. It is my goal and my hope and my desire to make sure that I am showing up my best self, even in the worst of situations. So that is what I try to share here. So if somebody is stopping by and they're wondering, what is that guy talking about? What's going on? That guy is talking about making sure that we are striving to be better, making sure that we are sharing moments of inspiration, making sure that we're sharing moments of motivation, making sure that even beyond inspiration and motivation, that we're sharing these moments of challenge, where we are challenging ourselves to step outside of the proverbial box, and we're challenging ourselves to step outside of our comfort zones, and we are challenging ourselves to accept the poking and the prodding, the pushing, the pulling that we sometimes get from people that we trust, and that we sometimes give ourselves, to make sure that we are not static human beings. We are not stagnant. We are not stuck in one place, but we are on our way to this place that's called better. And better just doesn't happen 5 weeks from now. I keep saying this, you all, but better happens when you believe it, that it is possible. Better happens when you conceive it in your heart and you believe it in your mind that I can be better than this. I can be greater than my circumstances and greater than my situations. That's when better happens. Better does not happen years, months, weeks, even days from now down the road. But it all starts today. It starts here. So if someone is wondering, what is that guy talking about? That's what he's talking about. And he's inviting all of us on this journey. He's inviting all of us to this space, this journey, to this place that is called better. That's why you see people putting in the chats, come on, get aboard, let's ride, and let's go along this train. And they're walking, they're coming in the chat room, speaking to everybody, because it's about joining each other hand in hand, as it were, at least to the extent that we can on this platform, right? So thank you all, those of you who have been with me for the long haul, and those of you who are yet in the chat speaking to people as you come in. It is so good to see everybody. Thank you all so very much. And hey, if you have not joined my channel, if you have not become a member, why don't you go ahead and subscribe? Just go ahead and subscribe to this channel, and then after you subscribe to this channel, click on that notification bell, because it lets you know whenever I've gone live or whenever I have uploaded new content. I want to share something with you all that was really birthed out of a message that I heard this past weekend. And the message was in part based on a series of books, actually, by Juanita Purcell, an author who wrote a book that's titled Why Cope When You Can Conquer. Isn't that a fantastic title? So if you want to add anything to your collection of readings, please go and look for Juanita Purcell's book entitled Why Cope When You Can Conquer. And I thought about how often we find ourselves coping, or we think we are coping. And I don't know, you all, this may turn into multiple conversations because I don't know that I'll get through everything this evening. But I thought about the depth of what it means. Why cope when you can conquer? I wanted to build something from that. And I wanted to just remind us that there is a way for us, there is a way for us to conquer and not just cope. And not that coping is a bad thing. I need to say that in the outset. Not that coping is a bad thing, because when we think from a very the the meaning, the denotation of the word cope means to effectively deal with something difficult. So that in and of itself does not sound like anything bad. It's just that the danger, and I'm not coming from the perspective of a psychologist or a clinician of any sort. I'm just coming from the perspective of having read some information, heard some information, lived life, and now I'm sharing some of the things from those various perspectives. But the danger of coping is that sometimes we think it's effective. We think it's effective, and it's not necessarily effective. That is the dangerous part about just coping. And some poor coping skills, as we think about it, might involve a number of things. And I'll get to them in a little more detail. But I mean, just think about it. As you may know it, some poor coping skills could include things like avoiding people, avoiding a situation that might cause you stress. And so you go through all of this avoiding and you become defensive, and you could sometimes end up harming yourself. That's not good coping. That's not good coping, because we experience external things, we experience internal things. And how many of you all know that we have this notion when it comes to experiencing in external things? We have this whole notion of what's called fight or flight. It's fight or flight. Either I'm going to stay in it and fight it and survive it, or I'm going to run from it. I'm going to flee. It would be flight for me, because I'm not staying and risk anything. And that's what happens when we're dealing with the potential for external harm and external threats. But a lot of times our threats come from the inside. So we have all these emotional, mental, and psychological and internal threats. And when it comes to internal threats, it's not a matter of fight or flight. It's a matter of either accept it or suppress it. Because if I'm dealing with it, if it comes internally, my heart, my mind, or it's inside somehow, it's not an external threat that threatens my physicality at all. But it's something that seeks, or I perceive it as doing some sort of internal harm to me emotionally or emotionally or psychologically or mentally. Then when that is the case, it's not a matter of fight or flight. It's a matter of accept it or suppress it. So I just want to talk about how to conquer and not just cope. Because again, coping in and of itself seems like a very positive thing to be able to do. Yes, it's positive to effectively deal with something difficult. It really is. That's a positive thing. But again, the danger is that sometimes what we think is effective may not necessarily be effective, because we sometimes engage in unhealthy coping strategies, even without realizing it. Sometimes we realize it. Sometimes we are crystal clear about the things that we engage in. For example, I mean, not just to pick on anybody, but I know people, and sometimes I've done the same thing. I've engaged in impulsive spending as a result of dealing with things. Sometimes people engage in not necessarily overeating, but just unhealthy eating as a way of dealing with things. Sometimes people engage in oversleeping because they want to escape it, they want to get away, or they don't have the bandwidth to face the world, so they oversleep a lot. But there's so many more issues that are unhealthy coping skills or unhealthy coping strategies that we can sometimes find ourselves handling and we don't even necessarily know it. So I wanted to talk about those. I wanted to highlight those. And I wanted to also at some point talk about healthy coping skills. So again, I don't know if I'm going to get to all of them. We may just have to make this two parts or multiple parts, but I want us to think about this, you all. And I'm so very serious because if we are going to get to this place that's called better, if we're going to get to this place called victory, if we're going to get to this place called success, then we must be able to cope. We must be able to cope effectively. And sometimes when we don't want to find ourselves coping all the time, but how many of you want to find yourself conquering things from time to time? I just don't want to have to handle it. I don't want to have to cope with it all the time. But sometimes I really just want to be able to put the lid on it and call it over. I want to be able to put the top on it and call it a day. I want to be able to just close it and say, you know what, that's it. That's one chapter, one book that's over and done. And I want to be able to move on to something else. I don't want to cope with some things for the rest of my life. I really don't. There's some things that I just want to conquer. I want to be able to face it and declare, finally, I win. There's some things I want to face and declare, finally, I've got the victory. There are some things I want to be able to face and declare, listen, I have the success. I've won the gold medal in this. I have the victory in this. I am successful in this. I am the winner in this. I am the conqueror in this. Because, I just got to go here. Because those of us who share the same faith realize, you know what, that I'm more than a conqueror. There's some things I don't have to cope with because I am more than a conqueror. So I want to talk about some of those things that are really sometimes unhealthy with respect to trying to cope. I want to talk about some of those, you all, because one of those is what we call avoidance behavior. And so many times we engage in avoidance behavior because, and you all work with me in the chat because I'm wondering how many of us have sometimes said, I can't be around anything negative. Let me know if you've ever said that. I can't be around anything negative. I can only tolerate positive things. I can only tolerate positive people. But how many of us know we don't? That is not the ideal world that we live in. So what does that mean, Cutler? It means that we have to learn how to handle the peaks and the valleys of life. We have to learn how to handle the joys and the sorrows of life. We have to learn how to handle the victories and the challenges of life, because there was an old sitcom, and I think the lyrics to that sitcom went something like, you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. And that's what life is about. We don't get to avoid all of the negativity. We don't get to avoid all of the pessimism. We don't get to avoid, not all the time. As much as we would like to surround ourselves with beauty and positive things, the truth of the matter is that life is a blend of good and bad and ups and downs and ins and outs and roundabouts. And I hope I'm helping somebody tonight. I hope I'm helping somebody even as you catch this replay. We don't live in an ideal world. We don't live in what's called a utopia, utopia. We do not live in that fantasy sort of world where everything is wonderful and there are rainbows and pots of gold and everything is perfect and beautiful and calm and serene. We don't live in that kind of world, but we live in a world where there's war and crime and racism and all of that and sexism, where all of that takes place. And we have to learn how to balance all of that. We cannot practice avoidance behavior and say, I'm only going to be around positive things. That's unhealthy coping. To think that we can shut all of that out. I know to the extent that we can, and we talk about it even on this platform, surrounding yourself with as much positivity as possible. But how many of us know that life really does happen? And it would be wonderful if we could surround ourselves with positivity all the time, but we just cannot. And so this notion of only only trying to be around positivity is not good, because we end up practicing avoidance behavior. That's just one example of unhealthy coping skills. Then another example of unhealthy coping skills is always trying to predict what's going to happen. Cutler, I don't know that I ever do that. that. I don't know that I ever try to predict what's going to happen. Well, maybe it's not you, but maybe there are people. Have you ever heard somebody say, I already know how this is going to turn out? When they think people are seeking their harm or out to get them, there are people who will say things like that. I already know what they are thinking. I already know their plan. I already know what they're going to do. I already know how this is going to turn out. That is a matter of always trying to predict what's going to happen. That is a matter of always jumping to conclusion about things that you think might harm you or people that might harm you. And then you try to respond before anything happens. Have you ever found yourself doing that? I already know how this is going to turn out. I know that they're seeking my demise. I know what the plot, what the plan is. So I am going to try to respond before anything happens. A lot of times that's jumping to conclusions. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but people who engage in that kind of exercise all the time, that is an unhealthy coping strategy. Because when you engage in that kind of behavior all the time, there's always somebody out to get you. There's always somebody trying to harm you. There's always somebody laying a trap for you. There's always somebody seeking your demise. There's always somebody trying to ensnare you. When you have that kind of thought process, perhaps you also have some deep insecurities. And those insecurities are consumed with jumping to conclusions about how people might try to hurt you. That's not a good thing. That is not a good thing. So yes, avoidance behavior is one, but jumping to conclusions all the time and always trying to predict what's going to happen, that's another way. That is another unhealthy coping strategy. And I alluded to this next one that I wanted to mention, isolation, the whole notion of thinking that you can isolate yourself, that you can confine yourself, that you can cut off the rest of the world. One of our basic needs, you all, one of our basic needs is socialization and connecting. It is a basic need to socialize, a basic need to connect with other people. And yes, there are some people for whom we need to draw boundaries. And again, we talk about that on this platform all the time. Yes, there are some people for whom we need to draw boundaries. But let's learn how to be let's learn how to be resilient so that we can coexist. Just draw. I encourage you, because I do the same thing. Draw boundaries for some people and say, listen, you don't get a chance to cross this line anymore. That's fine. Draw your boundaries. But you can't keep everybody out. Not everybody. To some degree, we have to learn how to coexist. We have to develop this thing that's called resilience so that we can coexist. We've got to do that. I'm just going to run down this list as I've made some notes. Another thing that we do that's sometimes very unhealthy is we make these negative comparisons. And we talk about this all the time, you all. And I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but it is so important for us to realize that we've got to stop making all these comparisons. And we don't even always make healthy comparisons. We make negative comparisons. We say things like, at least I'm not doing as bad as so and so. What kind of comparison is that? What kind of sense does that make? I'm doing bad, but I'm not doing as bad as them. So let me pose this question. If you say to yourself, I'm not doing this, I might be doing bad, but I'm not doing as bad as so-and-so, what happens when so-and-so starts doing better? What happens? So now you are doing worse than so-and-so. What am I saying? I'm saying stop getting caught up in what I call these low-level comparisons. Set the mark of the perfect man or the perfect woman. I don't mean perfect as meaning without flaws, but someone who is to be emulated, to be imitated, who has set a pattern, who has set the path, who has plotted the course for us to follow. Compare yourself with them in terms of trying to set aspirations, not just to imitate them to the point that you lose yourself. But stop these low level comparisons whereby you come out with the woe it's me kind of stuff. We need to stop that, because that is a way people do it in life. That is a way of coping with life. When I'm not doing as well as I want to, when I'm not when I don't have all the things that I want to have, when I can't show up the way that I always want to show up, when I can't be what I want to be, and be how and who and where and when I want to be, when I can't do all of that, I engage in what's called a low level comparison. And I may say, I'm not doing as good as I want to do, but at least I'm not that bad. No, let's not do that. Let's empower ourselves to move beyond that. I'm talking about how to conquer and not just cope, based on, again, a conversation, a message that I heard this past weekend. And here is something else in terms of this whole notion of unhealthy coping skills. Sometimes we can't even face our past. I know we talk about not getting trapped and not becoming imprisoned by your past. That's one thing. But one of the things that we have to do, you just can't paint a smiling face on your entire past. You cannot. If every part of your history may not have necessarily been a happy one, but we sometimes gloss over those negative moments. We gloss over those challenging moments. We gloss over those not so good moments, and we just paint a smiling face right over it. And we act like nothing bad ever happened. And that is what I call painting a smiling face on all of your hurts, painting a smiling face on all of your harms. But may I say this, you all, and I say this with all sincerity, and I say this from the perspective of wanting to empower you to be able to look at your past and move beyond it. May I remind you that standing in a place of wholeness today does not necessarily negate the fact that I've had some brokenness in my yesterdays. Let me say that again. Standing in a place of wholeness today does not necessarily negate the fact that I've had some brokenness in my past yesterday. I'm whole today. I'm complete today. I'm okay today. But that does not take away from the fact that in the past I've been cracked. In the past I've been broken. In the past I've been fractured. In the past I've just been almost dismantled. That was yesterday. That happened in my yesterday, but I stand today in wholeness. You don't have to put a smiling face on everything, but sometimes you look at your story so that you can share it with each other and show them that you overcame and that they have the power to overcome too. Sometimes you have to be able to look back at your past and see all of your brokenness so that your brokenness can identify with somebody who your past brokenness can identify with somebody's present brokenness. And you have the wherewithal to grab them and pull them and say, nope, I've been there. I've been there. And just like somebody pulled me out, I'm going to pull you out of this too. So you don't have to create this fiction. I know some people create fictions about their lives and they want everybody to think that everything has always been hunky-dory and wonderful and 100% and has always been a beautiful picture or just a rose bed of ease. But that is not the life that we all have lived. And so you don't have to feel forced to put a smiling face on all of your past. No, not at all. You can stand in your wholeness today and say, yes, I've had some brokenness in my yesterdays. I hope I'm helping somebody by saying that, because people want to force us to wear these masks like everything has always been all right. No, I come from dysfunctionality, but I'm fully functional today. I come from brokenness, but I stand complete and whole today. I come from a messed up past, but I realize that I am the handiwork of the Creator. You've got to say that. Don't let people force you. Don't let people force you not to be able to tell your story. And I'm not saying we have to live there and lie there and waddle in it, but from the perspective of being able to pull somebody through some of the things that you've been through, you don't have to put a smiling face on all of your past and act like it's just wonderful and nostalgic. Nope. Don't become in prison there, but don't put a smiling face on it and act like it never happened. That's not healthy coping. Because when you do that, I'm getting ready to say something, you all, and I hope that you all can accept this. And maybe you know people like this. It is my experience. It is my experience that when people lie about their past, they will lie about their present. And if you lie about your present, you'll lie about your future. So let's not even engage in that. Let's not engage in that at all. And then another thing, I'm just talking about unhealthy coping skills for right now because our underlying goal, the objective is to really talk about how to conquer and not just cope. And why are you saying that, Cutler? I thought coping was a good thing. Coping is a good thing, but a lot of times when we think that we're coping, coping means that we are effectively managing a difficult situation. Sometimes we are not effective in our management of these difficult situations. How do you know? Because these are all the unhealthy ways that I'm talking about. We sometimes try to manage these difficult situations. We try to manage these difficult situations sometimes by doing what we call avoidance behavior. We try to manage these difficult situations sometimes by trying to predict what's going on and try to respond before it ever happens. We sometimes try to manage life's difficult situations by finding ourselves in isolation. That's what we do. We try to sometimes manage these difficult situations, the challenges and the lows and the valleys. We try to handle those situations by sometimes just engaging ourselves in these negative comparisons. We try to sometimes do it, but just slapping a smiling face on everything that happened in my past. Everything in my life has been wonderful and full of gold and glitter. We do all of that. And then sometimes we try to manage these situations by just exploding. We have no self-control at all. I mean, just exploding. Listen, and people who explode uncontrollably, I do my best in trying to minimize my interaction with those people. People who would just explode uncontrollably on the dime over small, sometimes seemingly innocuous things, and they have these triggers. Sometimes I think these people are just harboring these deep wells of unexpressed feelings of emotion. What's going on inside of you that you can just explode uncontrollably all the time? And then you want to say your emotions got the best of you all the time? Not all the time. That becomes a part of your character. That becomes a part of who you are. And you need to work on that. When we find ourselves exploding, let me use the word we, when we find ourselves exploding uncontrollably over small, insignificant things, and we have these triggers, there's something that's going on deep within. Because a person like that makes what I call a grave mistake in thinking, maybe literally thinking, that yelling will resolve the issue. Screaming will resolve the issue. The issue is up here. And now I have to yell and scream because that's going to resolve the issue. I was having a conversation with someone over this past weekend, and I was telling them about when I walk into a room, I make an assessment about the energy of the room at the time. If the energy is at a 10, I don't feel like I have to walk in and match the energy of the room at a 10, because it may not be a good 10. It could be a bad 10. And if that's the case, I don't always have to match it because the room is filled with enough energy. Sometimes I stay in the room. Sometimes I purposefully lower my energy. Sometimes I leave the room. You don't have to explode. You don't always have to match the energy of what's going on, because sometimes it may need the opposite of what's going on. And then I see, wow, you all, I'm definitely going to have to continue this. Because here's another way that we sometimes use and engage in unhealthy coping. I'll conclude with this. Sometimes we overthink and we worry. People who overthink will end up worrying too much. People who overthink will sometimes end up worrying too much. And why are they doing that? Because I think they're trying to shield themselves from fear. A lot of times, there are some experts who say that there are just two basic emotions, love and fear. And all negative emotions, all other negative emotions are based on fear. But I think that sometimes people who overthink, they end up worrying, and they do so because it's based on fear. They're afraid of something. Sometimes it's that they're afraid. I worry because I'm afraid. I overthink because I'm afraid. And here's the interesting thing. The fear is usually not over an event or a circumstance, but the fear itself is a feeling that you are experiencing at the moment. I'm fearful now about something that's going to happen in the future. I'm fearful now about something that's going to happen in the future. I'm experiencing fear now. And worrying is your mind's way of preparing for the event that you think you're going to experience. I'm worrying because I'm going to experience something down the road. But catch this, I'm worrying and I'm fearful right now. So worrying is your way of trying to prepare for the event, but you're afraid right now. You're afraid right now. So what is it that you're suggesting, Cutler? I'm suggesting that you don't let your fear go unaddressed. Deal with the fear that you're facing, the fear that you're experiencing in the moment. Don't wait until the circumstance happens because you are afraid of it right now. Take control of the fear that you face today. And that's where I need to end. Take control of the fear that you face today, not the fear that you think you're going to face tomorrow. That's what worrying is about. And that is why a lot of people end up with headache and heartache when it comes to worrying. They worry about what's going to happen, but they don't deal with the fear that they're facing in the moment. Think about this, y'all. And I know I got to go. Anytime you have ever worried, you are fearful right now. You have anxieties right now about something that's going to happen in the future. It hasn't even happened, but you have the anxiety now. You have the fear now. And here's what we do. We don't face the fear that we're dealing with right now. We wait until 2-3 weeks later when we think the circumstance is going to happen. And so now it has all built up. But deal with your present fear. I got to get out of here, you all. Next time we come back, we'll talk about some healthy coping skills, because there are things that we are yet coping with, y'all. Things that we are still trying to handle. People are still trying to deal with PTSD. They're still trying to deal with trauma and these traumatic events, recovering after crises and natural disasters and things like the pandemic and all that kind of stuff. These disturbing events, people are still stressing and trying to cope with things like grief and things like loss, trying to understand the grieving process, trying to learn how to heal. People are trying to cope, you all, with stress and dealing with stress management. There's a whole lot of stuff that we are trying to cope with. And nobody is addressing. And again, I'm not talking from the perspective of a clinical or clinician or clinical situation, but I'm talking about life. That conversation, that message that I heard this past weekend just kind of messed me up, because it talked about why cope when you can conquer. And for us, we're doing a whole lot of coping and we're trying to cope, but our coping skills are subpar. Now, maybe you have excellent coping skills, but I haven't always had excellent coping skills, and I still find myself now needing to sharpen some of my coping skills. I hope some of you all can identify with this. I got to get out of here. You all do me a favor. Let's keep building community. Let's keep maintaining connectivity. Keep your heads up, but more importantly, keep your hopes up. Stay safe and stay sane. We're going to talk about this again when we come back the next time in a couple of days, and we're going to talk about healthy coping skills. I'm going to talk about some of these issues again, and then I'm going to tell you all. I'll just wait and surprise you. I would just wait and surprise you. All right. Do me a favor. Tell somebody until the next time to come on and let's talk to Cutler. Please know that from my heart to you, there is and always will be so much love. I've got to get out of here and say good night to you all. So good night, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.